I think that's recording again. In fact, that was quite hilarious. You may notice the background's changed. I had to move rooms because there was someone singing very loudly in the background in the next booth, and I couldn't concentrate. So early preparation and planning, it's kind of obvious. Um, Getting into good habits and rhythms, but this is the one I want to focus on, which is doing the little things well. So when you get your assignments or even exams, for example, um, the tendency is to focus on the big picture, and for example, there's rightly so, there's a very strong obsession about what topic am I going to pick, and how do I address the topic, what theories shall I bring into it, and I congratulate you for thinking like that, but don't forget the small stuff. And they say don't sweat the small stuff, it's the absolute opposite. Sweat the small stuff. So make sure the formatting is nice, the spelling is correct, the referencing system is good, that if it says 1,500 words and it has to be about that, do 1,500 words. Make sure that what you're actually writing is about the topic as closely as possible. Get the person to check it. Make sure you submit it on time. Do all these little things and just generally you'll do better at uni. And be like a nerd. So this probably applies a little bit less to distant students, but when you're at lectures or make use of the time effectively. Take real notes. Don't just relax and sit back and have a coffee and browse through the textbook. Actually hit it hard and hit it early. And my suggestion too, as a psychologist, is that you should focus on the hard stuff when you're relaxed, which means effectively in the mornings when you're bright, you've had one coffee, hopefully not more than that, and your brain is really in gear. Do the hard yards of learning material, and do the referencing, the formatting, the spell checking when you're tired, or back from work or something like that. So your brain has good moments and bad moments. Allocate the hard stuff to the good moments, the easy stuff to the when you're tired. However, there's a little bit more to it than that, and that is that brains tend to work better when they're fed, but not overfed. So, for example, with your exams, I'll talk about that a little bit later in the semester, but make sure you're not hungry when you go into the exam. Anyway, enough on that because we do have quite a bit of difference to get through, and I'll skip this particular slide because it's not that useful. And that slide, and we'll start with a definition of organisational behaviour. Effectively, it's the human stuff, it's the stuff that related to the human factor in organisations. And I did mention this in the intro 10-minute video, and you saw those video clips as well. Now, I do want to talk about the scientific method, and I'm going to go through it. I won't hammer too hard on this because it's not an absolute requirement of the subject, but the reason that I am keen on it is because if there's something special that this course brings to your degree, then it is this component, which is a scientific way of looking at the world instead of just relying on gut feeling or intuition. So a hypothesis is basically a question that you want answered. Now, for example, you're running a business, and let's say you run a nightclub, and this is the example I gave in the lecture, and you've noticed an upswing in violence. And you also remember that recently management, in their wisdom, decided to go with colour red, so they put red carpets in, red walls, and painted everything red, and the upholstery is red. The place is very red, possibly too red, and suddenly we've got an upswing in violence. And your question is, has the colour red caused this upswing in violence? And subsequently the costs for the company, like introducing more security guys, more people on the door, more bouncers. There's a real cost to the company. So answering this question is worth answering. Now, the population that you could use when you're testing something is the entire population that that you're focused on. So, for example, when opinion polls are run nationally, the voting age population of Australians who are registered to vote, that's your entire population. But Gallup polls, Morgan polls, and other polling companies that want to predict whether Tony Abbott or Kevin Rudd or Julia Gillard are going to win, Bill Shorten, as the case is now, they can't afford to poll 12, 15 million people. So that's the population though. They tend to take a sample, which is a small group, and they tend to use random sampling, which effectively means that they select out every single member of a population has an equal chance of being selected for the sample as any other member. Now, it's amazingly powerful. I used to run a newspaper, and one of my early successes that actually made me a lot of money effectively was being able to predict the mayoral winners and second place getters in 3 different shires in which my paper covered. It was a regional newspaper, and the voting population there was, let's say, around 40,000 people, and I couldn't afford to do a massive poll, and so I just did a random. I made sure that I put my sweetest talking staff members onto the phones to do the calling so that we get as high a response rate as possible, not many people hanging up. And I got them to randomly sample. I had to use the telephone book and there's biases in that because some voters don't have phones. And I had them ring up just 100, and I was able to predict 3 different shires with a sample of 100, first place and second place getter, and I ran a story on the front page which caused a sensation. In fact, it caused some death threats and basically threats and real disgruntlement because I picked an unpopular winner, unpopular with certain people in town. I said he's going to win the main shire that I covered, and but it showed the power of random sampling to actually get accurate results. Whereas if you just ask your mates or your friends, or you just ask people you happen to see on the street, that's not random, and you don't get accurate results. So if you're doing some sampling in the hotel to find out what's the cause, you need to make sure that you sample that every single person in the population that you're looking at has an equal chance of getting involved. Experimental and control group, I might pop over that a little bit, but you might remember in that clip from Big Bang Theory, there was some mention of 2 different groups where you compare it with each other. Control group gets what is effectively a placebo effect, and we will talk further about this in the next. But placebo effect or a placebo is a form of intervention that isn't real. It's to compare with the real intervention. It's a term that is generally used mainly in medical circumstances, and it's a word that comes from medical research, and I think it's a Latin word for faith. You have blind participants and experimenters. The example that I love to give, and it's a pretty gruesome one, is of a medical research that took place in New York, where they had a look at the impact of open heart surgery to have a look whether open heart surgery really did make a difference, as opposed to, and it's a good example of placebo here, by the way. So they took all the people on a waiting list for open heart surgery, double bypass surgery, and they allocated them randomly to 2 different groups. The population was all the people on the waiting list. Effectively, the population really is all people with heart disease, let's say, but they had a fixed sample. They then took all the people on the waiting list, assigned the ones who were willing to participate, so there was a bit of a loss there, and they were blind to which intervention they were given. So they couldn't see which intervention they were given, so they either got real open heart surgery with double bypass, or the alternative, and this is the gruesome bit, is that they cut open their chests and just opened it up, did a bit of fiddling, no real work, closed it up, and those people got a big stitching down the front. It looked like they'd had open heart surgery. They got all the marks of open heart surgery, but none of the real surgery, and then compared real surgery with the placebo surgery, where they had merely the belief that they had surgery, but they were blind to whether they got one or the other. And they did find that the impact of placebo surgery was almost as great as the impact of real open heart surgery. So it shows the power of faith in a really amazing way. And then they looked at statistical differences to see whether there was a statistically significant difference between the control group and experimental group. There's a lot of stats in psych, but you don't have to worry. I'm not going to introduce you to too much of that, nor about the bell curve. I'll leave that for another time. So, you've got your theory about the red carpet causing trouble in the pub, and it's an explanatory framework for a particular model, for a particular observation, and something you can test with a hypothesis, which is a clear question that's spelled out so that you can get a yes/no answer to it. And models are abstract views of reality. And right at the end of this talk, I'll give you one big example of a model. Now, one of the things that we will get, particularly if you dabble further in psych, but also within this subject, is this distinction between dependent variables and independent variables. Dependent variables are ones, I'll just fast forward. You've got some classic ones on the dependent variables here, like productivity, profitability, staff turnover, company turnover, job satisfaction, absenteeism, OCBs and deviant workplace behaviours. We'll talk further about them, but they're at the opposite ends of the spectrum. OCBs are positive behaviours that, individuals do within a workplace. I mean, when we hand over, being the manager of a few companies, and I'm always amazed when I hand over cash to someone, $500, $1,000, $1,500 for 37 hours a week. I'm amazed to find how much they give me back for that. And often they're thinking about the company when they go home and engaging in little behaviours, organisational citizenship behaviours that show that they've got an attachment to the organisation. And as a manager, that's a golden moment and some sweet spot that you have to try and aim for. And organisational behaviour is the discipline that will help you reach that sweet spot as a manager. Deviant workplace behaviours is where you've got the opposite phenomenon, and you've got staffers that are secretly sabotaging the organisation or causing trouble, like, for example, sexual harassment or bullying within the workplace. And as a manager, that's partly your responsibility, partly your fault, but also maybe the organisational culture. So these independent variables here at the bottom, they can either be individual, so for example, classically that's personality or individual skill. Group variables can be things like group size or group diversity, and organisational systems variables, which is like the organisational culture. All these things are touching on areas that we're going to be talking about, but dependent variables tend to be the variables that that are impacted on. Okay, so the independent variables, like individual personality, tends to impact upon how the organisation performs, for example. And sometimes what can be an independent variable in one circumstance can become a dependent variable in another. So the example that I gave in class yesterday was heat and aggression. I think that one of the places in one of these textbooks I read says that there's no relationship between heat and aggression, and that's in fact not the case. As temperature rises, there's definitely an increase in aggressive acts up to a certain point when it drops off again because you're just too hot to do anything, lift a finger, let alone punch someone. But if you think about it, heat is clearly the independent variable that causes aggression, the dependent variable. But under certain circumstances, aggression, if there's a lot of people in a nightclub packed together, can cause the temperature to rise, literally. If people start getting sweaty from fighting each other, subtly the temperature will rise. So your dependent and independent variables switch. So it's a little bit more complicated than that. Those are the key variables. Have a look at, go into Google Scholar. I might just see if I can do this. And Bloom, Eifert, Mackenzie, Roberts. So if you go to Google Scholar, and that's the address there. You should get used to using this. Bloom, and that's that one. And you should be able to download it if you go perhaps through the library you might have to do it, but it is well worth looking at. It's one classic case where they actually have taken good OB, good psychological research principles and applied it to the human resource management field. They did a study of, they took a whole population of publicly and privately funded carpet manufacturers in this state in India. They chose they sampled randomly 66 firms, 34, which is slightly more than half, agreed to participate, which is pretty good. 50, 60% response rate is not bad these days in research. They randomly assigned it to groups. Firms were either offered real consulting from Stanford or the World Bank, but the control groups were just given a sort of little bit of a comfort feel that they had some attention, but not, they got the placebo intervention where they just felt like they had some intervention. There were 5 different kinds of intervention, things on factory operations, quality control, inventory control, human resource management stuff, which is one of the ones that most interest us, and sales and order management. The trouble with this study, of course, is it mixed them. And with only 34 people in your group, you'd want to run several hundred companies with this kind of analysis in order to be able to separate out the 5 different interventions and see which one was most potent. You can do that with statistical analysis very reliably, but with 34 it wasn't possible to distinguish. They did find this evidence-based management tactics. They did find evidence that there was a significant impact of these variables, which is very encouraging. And it's a very good quality study, but it's just too small. Have a look at Mintzberg's 10 management roles. This is pretty much straight from the textbook, and it's one way. Remember, when you come to these theories in the textbook, and your exams, the quizzes are all going to be heavily based on the textbook, remember that it's just, there is no golden rule. It's that just because Mintzberg is famous and here are his 10 management roles divided into 3 categories, it doesn't mean that this is the way the world really is. It's just a model or of how management types can be divided up. There's certain things that, certain little smaller bits of reality that we can almost certainly say are true, that heat does cause an increase in aggression, but there's all sorts of mitigating circumstances. But we can't say for certain that there's 10 different types. I mean, that's just a matter of way of looking at it. But it is a nice way of conceptualizing the area from Mintzberg, and something worth looking at. There's a more general way of categorizing it. There's technical skills versus human skills versus conceptual skills, which is quite similar. I love this one, actually, and you could do worse than have a look at this particular section. This comes from the textbook. And the point to note, it's kind of embarrassing, but it's true, that successful managers are the ones who do well, get promoted. Effective managers are the ones who do well in terms of the company. They engage in effectively organizational citizenship behaviors. They do well for the company. Notice they spend 11% on networking, and the climbers, you could say, the ones who climb the ladder, spend more than 4 times as much, almost 5 times as much on networking. That's highly disconcerting, and from a company perspective, it's not good. It means that companies are promoting people who are just playing the game, and that's not particularly an effective thing to do. Some of the things that we will talk about over the next few 3 months is that organizations don't exist in a vacuum. I gave the example from my own business experience where I had that great success with that newspaper. That opinion poll certainly helped set us up. I then took that idea and put it into another community, same paper, very much the same principles, and it didn't work because the environment in which you positioned it was quite different. There needs to be a good organisation environment fit between what you do, and that can change with time. Universities, for example, at certain times universities recruit students easily, and don't have very low attrition rates, students dropping out. But then at other times, suddenly students start dropping out and people think, oh, the lecturers are doing a bad job, or the university is giving bad courses or something like that, or the student quality is changing. But it can sometimes be caused simply by the fact that unemployment's going down and there's better jobs with more pay out there in the market. People think, oh, I'm tossing up between learning and getting out and getting a job, and they leave. So the organisational environmental fit is quite important. Organisational efficiency is often to do with, think words like productivity. That's probably a good example of the ratio of inputs to outputs. And it can depend upon how subsystems work with each other. So there's, just as the organisation or the company is like a living organism in a larger world, or a culture or environment, a society, a nation, a planet, the subsystems are actually quite an important part. Like a living organism, a team, for example, can have its life of its own within the organisation as well. We'll be talking quite a bit about diversity, and the two key terms there, surface level and deep level diversity. So for example, in the class yesterday we had students from many different cultures, and they're highly visible differences. Clearly there was one student at least that was from Africa, and students from Asia, Australian students, and Arabic students from Middle Eastern countries. Australian, I should say, that's the wrong term, but Caucasian students, and such a blend. And that's a surface level diversity that I, as a lecturer, can just look around the room and I can see that. But there's also deep level diversity, which students may look different. They may be boys and girls, or males and females, and different ages, different cultures, different races, different professions. But deep down, they could all be the same, as in largely the same. They could all be conservative orientated, very family orientated. That's the deeper level issue. Deep level diversity refers to when people are actually quite different in the way they see the world, their personality differences, and they're invisible, they're deeper. Talk about complex new working arrangements, and virtual work and telecommuting are becoming increasingly common, even in academia, where a lot of academics work from home. They log into their computers at work from home, and it's as if they're there. They answer emails and do work in that way. Sometimes it's part-time, sometimes it's full-time. There are increasing amounts of, like salespeople working away from the office. In the old days, they'd have to go to a telephone booth and ring back to the office with their orders or to get orders from the boss. Now it's just an online environment. They could be in any city in the world, and they just feel like they're still connected using this virtual technology. Job sharing is where individuals, you know this, I'm sure, but where two individuals hold down the one job. One person might do the mornings because they've got responsibilities for their aging parent, and one person may hold down the afternoon job because they have got kids to pick up and drop off in the morning, that sort of thing. The new work conditions is there's an extraordinary array of things that fit into this category, but the example that I give there is from, Richard Branson introduced the take as many holidays as you like idea. This is not a new idea, by the way. It was tried by another American company many years ago, and they had quite a lot of success with it. Guess what? People who were given the option of how many holidays to take took less holidays. And as I said to the students yesterday, the issue here is a psychological one, is that if you give people a strong sense of control in the workplace, it's a powerful thing. It improves their job satisfaction, it improves the degree to which they're prepared to work intensely for the company, it improves OCBs, organisational citizenship behaviours. It improves creativity and innovation as well. So I'll flick through those ones. But diversity does mean, geographically spread, difference within your organisation, workplace flexibility, and also job insecurity. The example that I give there is that what's happening is that, some companies are just operating almost as shell companies, virtual companies, really. The textbook mentions Paul Newman, the pasta sauce company, Paul Newman's own, has just 24 employees worldwide, I think, something like that, and the rest of it's all subcontracted out. Another great example relating to the job insecurity, because with these subcontracting means that the company looks the same, the pasta sauce is the same, but they can suddenly switch from one firm to another. I had the experience with my dad's company. We manufactured paint rollers for a number of large firms, national paint companies. I won't mention names. One of them asked us to produce a home brand version of a paint roller. These were very high quality paint rollers for industrial purposes. And the home brand, it was a very big contract, and it was worth quite a bit of dollars to the company, small company. And we produced this home brand paint roller. We knew the dangers. We knew the dangers, but we had to do it. We were the customer. We had to do what we were told. And we produced that for quite a number of years and did quite well out of it. And then suddenly they changed. They replaced the roller, identical wrapping, identical recipe, if you like, not identical quality, at least not my dad didn't think so. But they replaced it with a Chinese roller. The customer, to some degree, didn't notice, but our company was badly damaged by that event, very badly damaged. So I've talked about the need or the value of doing systematic testing, but also it's worth mentioning that apart from psych, OB has also got a lot of sociology. The psych tends to be, if anything, focused more on the individual side, individual behaviour. Sociology captures the group, a lot of the group material. There's a form of psychology called social psychology, which is very similar to sociology, and I'm a social psychologist. Anthropology is the one that looks at the differences between cultures and cultural impacts on organisations, and increasingly in a global society that's a big issue. Contingency variables are, when we talked about dependent and independent variables, contingency variables are this impacts on that, but sometimes something else comes in between. Now, in the, let's say, the heat anger case that I gave you before, heat impacts on anger and deviant behaviours, let's say. True. But there's variables, contingency variables, that come in between, or mediating variables is another word for it, or moderating variables. And personality is a classic one. Some people are quite what we call emotionally labile, so they can react in their emotions swing from one way to another quite rapidly. And that may be a variable that sits in between heat and anger and governs to some degree whether an individual person is going to change. But there can be group contingency variables as well. Multiple levels of analysis variables. I think I've cut and pasted a little bit there, but the ones that we look at are individual, almost like the psych almost version of it, the group team, which is almost like the sociology version, the organisation system, again sociology more orientated, and then the cultural, which would be more the societal level variables and the way of looking at things. And I think we're just about done, except this last model. So this is a model, by the way, and when I looked at it first, I thought, oh, what are we doing to the poor students? We're throwing too much at them. But if you just calm down for a minute and go through me, it's actually not that complicated. You could almost simplify this into individual, group, systems, and then these outputs. And each one of these little buttons is one that we've talked about or are going to talk about in the next few weeks. So we've got lots of variables here, like on the individual level, biographical or personal differences. We're going to be talking about personality and emotions. Ability is the variable about what you're born with, almost genetically, and then learning is what you what you add to your natural abilities. And motivation is the degree to which the manager can impact on changing the drive with which a person does a particular tasks. And then there's group level variables, which include our favourite there, conflict, but also communication, which is in human resource management often referred to as voice. There's presence or absence of teams. We talked about team size. And then there's the cultural level variables. And so it's not so much of a Panadol moment. It's not as big a headache when you look at it like that. But that's a model of how you notice that we think that this leads to that, leads to that, leads to that, all these arrows. That's a conceptual overview of OB. It's not saying that that's definitely how it is, but it is it's one of the possibilities. Well, just in closing, I've done a half an hour video, which is pretty good going, and I think I've captured everything that's key here. Once again, really welcome to the course. Once again, it's been lovely getting some emails from you. It makes me feel connected to you just as you're connected to me, hopefully. Looking forward to it. And if there are a few teething problems with this course this year, remember this is the first time I've done this course. There's a lot of technical software behind the scenes that I'm still getting a grasp of, but between us, you and I will get this right. And for example, I'm not going to be completely strict about if you choose a topic and it's full, for your assignments. There's ways around all this. Okay, just talk to me. And welcome aboard, and you'll probably hear quite a bit more about me over the next few months, because I like to use personal examples. And my background includes, just to give you an idea, I've run a business in China, neon light manufacturing. I've run a media business. With my dad, I ran a manufacturing business, painting industry. I currently run a charity that builds schools in Bangladesh. That's a voluntary role. And I think I'm forgetting something in there. The radio stations, and of course my academic, I've got quite a few years of academic research mainly. This is my first full-time proper teaching gig, and I'm really looking forward to it. But thanks very much, and I hope this worked.